We're going live and we're on the air. All right.
Hey, Paul Bond, how are you?
How's it going, Jim?
I'm doing good. I'm looking
All
forward to
right.
week two of wire 106 DS 106,
Yeah,
where we'll
and
be
we're
talking about three episodes,
episode
not six,
10.
not nine.
Yeah. But today
Yeah,
is episode 10.
the cost.
The cost. Yeah.
Cost.
Um, it's interesting how that title comes into play in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
I mean, the great cost at the end, obviously, is Kima,
Right.
right? Um, but you can see it in different ways all along, right? I mean, you can
Yeah.
see it at the cost of Wallace, cost of
Right.
Hobbs,
Yeah.
um, the cost of being clean, as we see right up front.
Yeah. Waylon talked about the cost of that, you know.
Absolutely.
At
Yeah,
least you have your health.
that's right. That's right. And also, what was the cost of Whalen's own kind of campaign with Jimmy that he's starting to now question? The
Yeah.
campaign about, fighting Avon Barksdale. And we're going to see in the next episode that that's one he's willing to give up for the cost, at the cost of his, political career as a judge.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, there was a thing I put in my blog about D'Angelo and the cost of his
Yeah,
girlfriend there.
that's right. Yeah, a very literal cost, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Bigger apartment,
yeah. Bigger
more.
apartment, new bedroom set.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, I really love I mean, I'll go on every time I chance I get, but I love the opening of this episode. Uh, and you'll notice throughout the opening of this episode, there's no word spoken except for, "Hey, what's up, Bubs?" So you got Bubbles sitting on a bench in the park, and it's just brilliant acting, and it's just brilliant direction because you have him looking as fresh as he's looked since you've seen him. His kind of face kind of coming back together. He does that crazy red around his
Yeah,
nose, and he's on his third day. He's starting to clean up. And you can kind of see the crispness of the light. And there's little kids out playing, and obviously they're pulling bubbles, right? So that
yeah,
idea of the bubbles and like this really sense of like, the life of Bubbles is changing. And you get that tight shot on the leaves and this kind of idea of life. And it's really light, and it's really light in terms of like both light in terms of the light, but light in terms of the feel. Like, wow, where is this in Baltimore? This is a part of Baltimore we haven't seen. And you think about that in relationship to what you get at the end of the episode, where you
yeah,
get this darkness, and you see that same space defined by drug dealers and offering blue caps, and Bubbles is really fighting it. And then you have the ultimate darkness of Kima in the alley. So there's this really yin and yang of this episode between the kind of opening and that kind of breathing in life, and then they take it away from you. And that's kind
yeah,
of what often happens in this episode or in the show, or more broadly. But it's really striking in this one, and just the fact that Bubbles, this character so well that without a word spoken, you really can get communicated all of his different emotions of seeing the world again for the first time after being an addict, of kind of imbibing the space and world around him, seeing it anew, seeing the kids. You get to know later in the episode more about his family history, the fact that he has a son that he couldn't take care of, and you kind of really Bubbles is a great character to begin with. But I just love this opening because it gives you a sense of him without saying one single word, which is another testament to the skill of characterization and of direction and of the visuals in this series. It's just amazing.
and part that I talked about was like the sound in that, like as all it's gone, you hear the birds chirping, you can hear the breeze and the trees, the children playing, and all that stuff. Um, and that really adds a lot to it.
Yeah.
Just listening to that, and I believe I found an interview of Jen Ralston talking about putting that scene together, like all that went into just making that sound work. Um, but it makes a nice parallel to like the scene at night where he's probably in the same park,
Yeah.
but it's dark and you listen to the sounds in the background and there's like sirens constantly, car horns, and there's this like whoosh noise instead of the breeze. It's like, I don't know, almost like a storm coming on, and then you hear the guy in the background, death row here, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And it cuts to cut rate, right? There's a point at which it cuts to where they pick up,
Yeah,
and it says cut rate, and there's this kind of really play on the sound and also the visuals. But yeah, I was really struck by that, and that kind of the two different worlds we see through the eyes of Bubbles in that park, which is almost two different Baltimores depending upon the time of day.
yeah, yeah. And there was another sound scene. Well, I pulled out the sound of it. Lauren picked up on it, where um, Daniels takes Wallace to his grandmother's house to hide him out in the country somewhere, and you can hear the crickets in the background, and he doesn't even know what those are, you know.
Yeah, he seems to have forgotten, right? Like he says he was out there for a summer when he was 9, and then he
Yeah,
goes back, and it seems like he's forgotten what that sound was, which it was pretty striking to think of, in my mind, and I responded to Lauren about this on Twitter, is just how small one's world possibly could be,
yeah,
depending upon your situation, depending upon, and we see Wallace's world, and we see the extent of that room he lives in, of that apartment, and what he has to look out on every day. And yeah, it kind of brings home when you see him outside of his element. And just that scene where he's got that great shirt, it's like a purple striped shirt, and he's walking away from the payphone where he calls Poot, and that idea of the truck that comes by with the hay bales, and he's
yeah,
walking, and you kind of see him go across like a little bit in the grass to avoid the truck, and it's just a completely different setting, and just it's powerful, when you kind of think about that for a second, like how our setting defines us, how where we find ourselves, right? This notion of facticity, the space and world we're born into, defines us. And that's a really powerful idea. I mean, particularly there's been this article going around from the Washington Post about a 25-year longitudinal study about kids in Baltimore who came from these lower class neighborhoods and families, and just how much their identity and how much who they are and how much their situation socially is determined by that, by the class they're born into, right? By the place in the city they live, by their race, by their gender. And that notion of this determined space based on this arbitrary notion of where and when you were born is a really powerful idea. That's, this American dream that starts this whole series, right? When they're saying, it's America, man. It undercuts that study from Johns Hopkins, undercuts the whole rhetoric of the dream, undercuts the whole rhetoric of mobility. And it's a really kind of depressing study, if you were to read it, because it suggests that our vision of mobility is extremely limited based on where and when and how you grew up.
yeah,
Scary stuff.
yeah. We like those stories of people who come out of nothing and build something out of themselves and sort of ignore the fact that that's a statistical outlier, you
Yeah,
know?
absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of statistics, right? I mean, absolutely, right? And so much of it is driven by this kind of statistical anomaly, like you're talking about, is defining a whole way a culture works is not very healthy. And a
Yeah,
kind of ethos of a culture can't be dictated by a statistical anomaly, like you're saying.
yeah,
It's irrational.
yeah,
So yeah, I mean, I really do. I just love the beginning and the sound, but just this whole yin and yang of this episode, because you also have that with the police work. So you have that with Bubbles, and then the police work. Like this is when the case starts to blow open, right? They're starting to link the fact that they can get Stringer Bell, they can get possibly Barksdale. They're not sure exactly how because he's part of nothing, but they got Wallace. And by getting Wallace, they can really start lining up all these big shots, and they can bring down the Barksdale Empire. So you have this real sense of their police work in The Wire finally paying off. And then you get at the end of the episode, this bust and buy mentality, this buy and bust mentality that comes from Burrell that gets Greg shot in the chest, right? And
Yeah.
puts you in critical condition. So you have that yin and yang too, of like the sky's opening up, and then the bureaucracy and the institution and this kind of public, this kind of polling almost like this. I'm finding the wrong word, but this kind of,
Yeah.
this notion of public approval and the idea of making a demonstration, right? We learned this in the next episode. Put the drugs on the damn tables, right? Like make a showing, and it's a really not only like stupid, but it's potentially devastating to the people who are involved, which is a really really strident critique of how institutions work, particularly the police and the police department in this case. So powerful stuff.
Yeah, they want the easy victory, the easy way out, you know, buy bust, catch someone right there. Um, Dope on the table makes a big show, whereas the slow, methodical, get what needs to be done, it's too much work and too much money, maybe.
Well, it's also dangerous,
Yeah,
right? Like that's what we've learned, I think, from the political,
yeah,
all the money.
it's
Like it's
gonna,
actually dangerous to the people in power. You
yeah,
never know what you're going to uncover. Like you let someone like Lester Freeman keep on doing this police work, and you don't know who's going to be. Now, I thought that was really interesting in one of the early episodes when they started to find out that they were looking into Barksdale, and they had a wire up. Is so many people started giving their donations back, right? Remember, it was in Rhonda's office. Her boss was like, we took $5,000. We didn't know where it's from, but we want to give it back to you. And I
yeah,
just found such a telling little scene about how deep this stuff lies. And there's a great scene in next episode. We'll talk about it when Jimmy and Rhonda really go at it in
yeah,
terms of questions of integrity and all of our complicity in allowing this system and this corruption to basically become not only sustainable but something that makes careers on. It's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah.
What else?
Um,
Episode 10, the cost.
what I focused in a lot on this one was D'Angelo. Um, there were a
Yeah.
lot of other things going on besides him, but um, it's one of the things that I picked up on. There's these nice shots where he's listening to Danette tell him about all the money that he needs to spend, new place, new bedroom set, new couch. Um, and you see him standing by the windows. You see those vertical blinds. Um, and this is something that plays up in like film noir. Um,
Yeah.
you get these blinds that with those vertical stripes and sort of give you that prison feel. He's trapped in this situation and he does not want to be there. Um, it's a nice little visual clue. And then the other thing I like about that scene was the way it ends. Um, you get this sound of Danette yelling at him as he walks out, and it cuts to a voice on the wire, like, why you holler at me? I'll get to you when I get to you,
That's right. Exactly. Well, there's a really nice transition. I think it's in, yeah. No, it's not in this episode. It's in episode 11. But one of the things that struck me about this episode was Wallace. Not only with the crickets, which was really, and the scene by the road, which I mentioned. And I think that's in this episode, but that might be in 11, so I'd have to double check that. But one of the things that struck me that I know is in this episode was the scene where Wallace is in the interrogation room and Jimmy's talking about the fact is I didn't have to do anything. He was just ready. And the kid basically, based on the brutal beating and murder of Brandon, gave them all up, right? Gave Weebay up, gave Stringer Bell, was basically the key to busting open the whole Barksdale movement. And Jimmy's talking to Bunk, and they look into the interrogation room, and you see Wallace, and the shot is such that you see Wallace sleeping. And he literally looks like a baby, right? And he is, like he's a kid. And it's one of the striking things to watch this kid taking care of all the other little kids. It's like, he's a kid stuck in this world. And I think it really reinforces just how brutal this world is. You know what I mean? And can be, particularly how violent it is towards children. And I think that's a broader societal ill that we all share right now in terms of how we treat and represent and project, this notion of children. But getting back to my point, what's really crazy is when Jimmy is looking at him with Bunk, he's like, what the hell are we going to do with him? Like, they have him. They got what they needed for him. They're going to try and find him a hotel, but that doesn't work out, so they send him out to his grandmother's out by the harbor or by the bay. But there's this notion of the human cost, and that's how I think about this episode is, Wallace is a human cost, both to the police departments, the drug dealers, and he's disposable, as we learn by the end of the season. And it's one of the deeply tragic realities of, I think broadly how our cultures kind of come together around how we understand human life, and I think The Wire is really interrogating that. But in terms of even the police and the institutions not being able to take care of the people who are going to help them make a case, right? They couldn't even take care of Wallace. They didn't have the money, they didn't have the resources, and Jimmy asked the question that I think resonates throughout the series, right? Like, who's going to take care of this kid? Who's going to take care of these people? Who the hell is helping out anyone else in this series in some systematic institutional way? We see how the institutions can be used to kind of break people down. We could see how they can be used to kind of, I don't want to say completely not protect people. I mean, there's a real sense of also protection in breaking up this drug ring. But when it comes to taking care of the individual, right, or looking after a kid who's been completely kind of neglected, finds himself on the kind of margins in every possible way, he's a human cost. He's a human cost to the game. And, Wallace, like Brandon haunts Wallace, Wallace haunts me throughout this series. And I can't believe he doesn't haunt someone like Jimmy or Lieutenant Daniels. Like, the death of this kid is it's a horror. It's one of the horrors of the series, I think. And there's many of them, right? It's just one of the ones we get to know early on. And so that's one of the costs that kind of comes up to me is the real human cost of these kids and, their experience and the fact that we, live in a culture that lets this thing happen on a regular basis and we turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah. Wallace ends up haunting D'Angelo in the long run.
He does.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you'll notice there's a scene there where Wallace doesn't turn in D'Angelo. He has the opportunity to, and he's like, what about D? And he has. Remember, I mean, Jimmy's basically saying about a woman murdered in the North Side.
He knows the story, yeah. And, like, Wallace catches himself because
he picks
there's an understanding between the two of them, like they both know they don't belong there.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a real sense of the human cost that comes back to the broader kind of chess analogy, and we've come at it, and I just loved your reading of the pawns in Game Day. The idea of those pawns lined up ready for battle, and I think, well, they weren't the pawns, actually. They were the players, right? They were the knight,
Right.
they were the rooks, and they were the queen, and they were the king. But, Wallace and D, to some degree, they're the pawns, right? They're the ones who are disposable. That's, you get to know everybody, right? Like, that's what's so cool about The Wire. On a side note, and I've been reading Homicide. Hold on. So David Simon wrote this book in the early 90s, which is called Homicide. And so I picked it up, and I've been reading it pretty assiduously. I really like it. And what I'm finding is so many of the characters in The Wire are based on his early characters here, like Jay Landsman. Sergeant Landsman, who's almost an identical character to the one you get on The Wire, but supposedly he's not. He's very thin. But the other thing that's interesting is David Price, who's a crime writer from New York City, writes, I think that's his name, David Price. No, Richard Price, forgive me, who wrote Clockers, and he's a writer, a New York City crime writer, wrote The Wanderers of all things, which was a big favorite of mine when I was growing up. But he talked about Simon's HBO series as kind of the Russian novel of television series. And I think if you haven't read Russian novels, one of the things you might realize if you read like Dostoevsky's Brother Karamazov, and students brought this up, like Maggie brought this up in her blog post this week, it's like it's hard to keep all the names and characters straight because it's a world. And I love that this world of The Wire, which we're seeing now in its first chapter or iteration with season 1, is a world. And people like Bubbles and Wallace and McNulty and Judge Phelan and Rhonda and Griggs, etc., come in and out of focus as we move through the various complexities of this kind of institutional culture. And it's not unlike what Dostoevsky does in The Brothers Karamazov. It's not unlike what some of Tolstoy will do in Anna Karenina. And it's really interesting when he made that connection between the Russian novel and this kind of almost Balzacian world of characters and different kind of almost tableaus of moments in a culture. I'm really struck by the literary underpinnings of The Wire and how closely they are embedded within the culture. I think when we read as literary students, and that's my training as a kind of reading as literature, one of the things we miss about great literature is how embedded it is in critiquing its own culture, right? Dostoevsky talking about like the Nietzschean worldview, and although Nietzsche got his worldview in some ways from understanding Dostoevsky, but this whole moral dilemma of modern society, right? And the kind of Russian dilemma of being a kind of modern society in a backward way. And his books are all about that and all about the struggle. And to me, that's Simon, and that's The Wire. It's all about our moment struggle, about this kind of society that can't take care of its people. And Wallace, for me, is the biggest, brightest, most haunting example of that. And I find it really kind of striking when I read that by Richard Price, and I'm reading Homicide to get a sense of David Simon's kind of broader view of this across true crime and across his own career, but then also linking that up to the Russian novel, it just really hits home what we're doing here with The Wire. And I think when I started first watching The Wire, it was episode 9, episode 10 of season 1 that I started to realize that, whoa, this is something else. And it took me that long. Other students in this class, it was a lot quicker. They caught the bug. It took me up to about now to realize, wow, something else has happened. And that was before everybody read it as if it was, the masterpiece that it is. It was a TV show on HBO. But it was at that point that I realized that, no, it's not just that. It's a great work of cultural critique framed as a fictional story about Baltimore's institutions. And it's a very interesting work because it's a work of our moment.
Yeah, it's that literary connection. That's a nice thing because it's very different from what you get not just in cop shows but in TV shows. That it's building something much larger and it's expecting a lot more of the audience.
Yeah.
A normal TV show is sort of like geared towards someone who's like watching it half doing something else, so it isn't going to tax them mentally. They can easily keep track of everything, and if they miss 5 minutes when they go to the kitchen, they can fall right back into place. And this is like very detailed and very complex, novelistic as opposed to a TV show.
That's right.
But with that work that you have to put into it to pay attention to it, there's really a big payoff too.
There is, and all the pieces matter, right? We come back to that. Students have written about that. That hits home. Daniels in this episode says it to Burrell. He basically is saying, look, we don't want to do a buy and bust because all the pieces matter and we've got to stay up in that wire. and that's where Burrell toes the line. This is what this kind of original thing was always about, was buy and bust, was about a big show but no real police work. And I think one of the things that during these discussions is why I'm very interested when students start coming in and adding their perspective is one of the things I really appreciated about reading the student blog post this week was all the things we're missing. Like Maggie Stowe, and she really did an unbelievable job of going through so many of these episodes in depth. She talked about, questions of gender, questions of discrimination, questions of really at heart of the show that, we need to also reckon with, right? Like, this show is not a comfortable show. It's not a comfortable show when we're talking about issues of race. It's not a comfortable show when we're talking about issues of gender, right, and the representation of gender. And it's a difficult show on many levels, and I think that's important. And I don't think the show's perfect either. Why I think it's a very powerful show, I don't think it's perfect. And so I'm really hoping that as we move with these discussions, that those kind of perspectives start to kind of move in. And you said this very well, Paul, in your weekly summary post for the students. It's like we're presenting our positions here and our readings of it. And they're readings that you may agree with or disagree with, and that's fine. Because that's where you have your space and your voice in this class to speak to disagree with, to take issue with. And we really now, part of week 2 is about building community, is about getting your reactions out there, is about discussing this stuff, not only with me and Paul, but with other people in the class, and start making those crucial connections around your vision and understanding and ideas of the course. So really, I want you to start pushing that. And, don't mistake us. The Wire is not a sacred cow. If you got problems with the Wire, if you think it sucks or you think it's overrated, we want to hear that. Like, I would love to have that discussion. That would make me work, and we want to work, right? Like, I'm here to work.
Yeah.
So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, a few people already have brought up things that are objectionable about it. There's that one F-bomb scene.
That's right. Which I don't disagree with, frankly.
Well, I don't know. It depends on where you come from, I guess. Because
I just felt like I could see the F-bomb scene, but I just felt like it was overdone. Right? By the third or fourth one, you could see what he was doing. And I guess unlike most of the season, it's not always so telegraphed like that scene was.
Well, I want to say when I first watched it, it just sort of washed over me, and I didn't realize that they only used one word in the whole scene. Because I understood it.
That's yeah.
Yeah. Oh. So it's all where you come from to it, I guess. But
True.
Yeah, students are bringing some interesting perspectives into it. Like nowadays, like gay marriage is totally accepted. Well, not totally, but broadly. Just 10 years ago, when this show was out, those relationships with Kima and Omar, those were like edgy things, and
yeah. Well, and the other thing I think Maggie brought this up too, but I'm not sure. I think so. Is the idea that the relationships between the gay relationships in the show were still very much delineated by masculine and feminine characters. And the issues, that there has to be one or the other. And the masculine characters, say like Kima or Omar, are the kind of badass bangers, right? Whether it be for the cops or for the drug dealers or even for the Robin Hood-like figure that's Omar. And that kind of that dualism still stands in this show, right? Like, there's some assumptions this show has that this show doesn't escape. And I think it's worth bringing them to the fore. Right? It's worth bringing to the fore, some of the assumptions it makes about race, right? And some of the assumptions it makes about broad kind of stereotypes. Although I think and I'd love to hear from other students, I think this is one of the shows that really kind of usurps some of those broad media stereotypes we have around questions of race. So it's an interesting show, and we want to focus forefront some of its problems, because I think it's there that we'll find some of the interesting discussions that need to happen. David Kernahan did a great job early on with this when he started talking about, the forefronting of the stripper and the strip club and the question of gender as a representation of the body that we're familiar with. And that had to be the HBO background setting because obviously you needed nudity and sex to sell it. And that's a whole nother kind of, we know that Simon was forced by HBO to include a flashback to sell the pilot. So who knows what other pressures they underwent to sell the show in certain ways. And maybe it was choice. I don't know. But, I mean, a close reading is also a close critique in all the meanings of that word.
Yeah. I think something we've seen in the latter episodes is that strip club scene is kind of downplayed.
It is.
Like, he doesn't need that to sell the show anymore.
And I wonder if that's intentional. Like, I really do wonder if that's, I mean, I would be interested to hear if that was an intentional move away from.
Like, you've stuck with it this far, you're one of the people who understands,
Yeah, that's
You're
right.
not just looking for that simple thing,
I'd be interested to hear from students, and maybe this would be an assignment, but I'd like to know if they could locate the moment where they came over, or if they came over, to say, oh, wait, I understand maybe that this is not. Maybe we gave it away with these discussions. I don't know. But I have to believe many of them aren't watching discussions, and B, that they came over based on the show, not based on what someone said to them or talked at them. I'd be interested if they could locate a particular scene or character or moment where that happened.
Yeah. I kind of asked about that on one person because she said up front, this is really rude and crude and all that, but she has to keep on watching it.
That's right.
It's like, what is it that makes that happen?
Yeah. What's the train wreck that you have to watch?
Because that's the storytelling art, that draws you in and holds you there.
That's right. And it's really good to try and isolate it.
Yeah.
Think about what that is. And I mean, maybe one way to kind of finish up this discussion is to talk about the end of the episode because it's going to bleed into the beginning of the next one. And the end of this episode is really dark. This is an episode where Kima is she's with Orlando and Savino, and they're being taken around what seems now like, this completely disorientated space in Baltimore, on the west side, I believe it was.
Yeah.
And they go in to this kind of parking lot or a driveway near a project. Savino leaves, and it's this really dark, haunting scene where she's talking to Orlando, she's trying to talk on the wire to let people know where she is, and she's like, wait, what's that? And then what happens is what we see happen in the show. Orlando's shot, she's shot in the chest, and the policemen frantically are looking for her but can't find her because the street signs are all turned around. It's just a brilliantly done scene. And then you have it played back again in the next episode. And you have the ending of this episode where Rawls kind of takes over the scene and they try and get some kind of sense of order, bleed directly into it in the next episode. And I just think, the light that we started with Bubbles and the kind of breath of fresh air in this new world really kind of comes into this claustrophobic, stuck in the back seat of a car with, basically, two hitmen ready to shoot dead. I mean, you couldn't get more radically different moments in this scene probably than any other episode in the entire series. Is this kind of, completely schizophrenic episode of lightness and breath and hope that ends in almost bone-crushing mortality. It's a really it's a schizophrenic episode in some ways, and it's a dark one, and it's what sold me.
Yeah. And there's a shot right at that closing scene that I love when the camera goes across the windshield and you see the bullet holes and you see Orlando there dead and you see that 8 balls hanging from his rearview mirror, like that bad luck symbol there.
That's right. And then it ends. And one of the things I really liked, we talked about it with the surveillance, but it also ends with this foxtrot, right? With the aerial view from the helicopter. And it's really lifelike, right? It's the helicopter almost like, you know, I want to say it's not X-ray, but it's the helicopter night vision that you're viewing. It's really realistic and lifelike. And that realistic, lifelike kind of lens through which you view some of this stuff is part of the haunting part of it, because it doesn't take a big jump in your imagination to see this, right? And to see that the wreck that drove this was some muckety muck in downtown Baltimore who wanted a buy bust at all cost, and he got it, and Kima got it as a result. And I think Lakeisha was saying this, like, not Kima, right? Like Lakeisha was saying this on Twitter, like, not Kima. And I kind of felt like, really, this was Kima's episode. She was talking about that awesome moment when she looks at those patent leather shoes and she looks up, and the guy threw her, the cop who was training her threw her the bracelets, and kind of it was her coming on, right? Like it was her moment,
Right.
and it actually lost all of its kind of power at that moment when you see someone who loves the job as much as McNulty, if not more, and what that means in the end. It's crazy stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna have to end this here because my battery thing is about to go.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's probably
All
better
right.
for everyone.
All right.
All
So
right.
until next time.
Big fan, Paul.
All right.
DS106, wire106 for life.
For